pretend how many do we have PowerPoint presentations? So,
Yes.
two. Welcome, thank you for joining us. We have a very interesting and relevant, particularly topical theme that we will discuss today. We will look at why Albanians are coming to the UK, and we'll have a chance to look at different perspectives, including the push and the pull factors. We are very lucky to have very experienced researchers and scholars working on UK as well as Albanian politics and developments. So we have Andi Hoxhaj. He's a lecturer in law at the University College London. He has worked extensively on EU rule of law, anti-corruption. He has won the British Academy Rising Star Award in 2018. And he has also published, his book is on EU anti-corruption policy, a reflexive governance approach. So he will be our first speaker today, give an overview of some of the key developments in Albania. And then we also are very lucky to have Peter Walsh. He's a senior researcher at the Migration Observatory at the Compass Centre at the University of Oxford. He has worked widely on UK immigration policy, including family migration, student migration, irregular migration, detention, asylum. So he will provide a reflection on UK's approach and how the UK has been dealing with this matter. And then we are very lucky to have Fabian Zhilla. He's a senior fellow at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Crime. He has worked as a consultant on a number of different EU projects and contributed to studies on terrorism and cybercrime. So he will bring another very interesting and important perspective looking at crime and broader implications for developments and migration from Albania to the UK. So we are going to start with Andi, and he will tell us a little bit more about Albania.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank you also for inviting and to Oxford for putting this wonderful event together. So welcome everybody. So my presentation and talk would be to kind of give the broader overview when it comes to the history of Albanian migration and until it reaches to 2022. So just to give you a bit of an overview, international migration has been very much historically linked with Albania, and some Albanian calls themselves as a nation of migrants. And initially, or the first sort of statistic that we can find is in 1400 to 1500, where more than 200,000 Albanians, or a quarter of Albanians at the time, left Albania for Greece and Italy, and this was part of the Ottoman Empire coming to Albania and invade. Then in 19th century, we had some communities of Albanian being established, particularly in Athens, in Cairo, Bucharest, Istanbul, and Sofia. And then in the 20th century, we had more than 60,000 Albanians being present in the United States. But during this time, then we had communism in 45, and during this time, migration was forbidden by law, and if you left, you would sort of be imprisoned. But then in the more sort of recent time, especially post communist migration, which I call it the first wave, started in 1990 to 1992. And the first sort of wave as you can see in the next slide, was very much linked with poverty and the collapse of communism. So the first sort of left about 5,000, as you can probably see here in this picture, was where nearly 3,000 Albanians went to the Western embassies to claim asylum. And then the second sort of wave during this time was in 1991, where nearly 26,000 Albanians left on boat, which you can see there, to Italy. Now, in the 90s, about 500,000 of Albanians were residents in Italy and 600,000 in Greece. And we only had 150,000 Albanians based in the UK, US, and other parts of the EU. Whereas the second wave of post-communist migration was in 1997 to 1999. And here it's very much linked because in 1997, there were some Ponzi schemes, like in many post-communist countries operating in Albania. And at the time, the economy was growing by 8%, but these were sort of fictitious statistics because they were very much fueled by the Ponzi scheme. But what happened at the time, the Ponzi scheme went bust and nearly 700 million pounds were lost. But what this meant, nearly 45 to 52% of the Albanian GDP, because at the time it was only 2.1 billion pounds, crashed. And this fueled the second wave of migration. At the time, we also had a civil war in Albania, where the society was weaponized and nearly 656 weapons were given and nearly 3,000 people died. But here, and Fabian will speak more about it, it's kind of the tipping point where organized crime networks from Albanian criminal gangs really rose up, and they have since become a bit more and more powerful. At that time, we also had the war in Kosovo, and this kind of fueled a large wave of migration, especially Albanians coming to the UK. Now, coming to the factors, and these are the two sort of wave of migration, but between 2000 and now, there's sort of been a silent wave of migration, and the statistics are not clear-cut because the last census that was done in Albania was in 2011. There was supposed to be a census last year because Albania opened accession talks with the EU, and that would kind of define quite clearly how many Albanians are leaving. But what are some of the factors after the 2000s? Well, one, and most importantly, is economic factors. And some of the statistics as well as the barometers show that nearly 83% of Albanians want to leave, and nearly 50% are actively researching or applying for a job abroad. And that is closely linked because the average wage in Albania is 422 to 460 pounds. But in fact, other independent researchers find that it's only 220 pounds. And these sort of wages are mostly if you work in government. Now, there is a lack of rule of law, and my sort of research in this area is closely linked, and in particular when it comes to property rights. So property rights in Albania are precocious, and since the collapse of communism, the government has given people the right to use the land, but ownership, it's still very questionable when it comes to the legal ownership, and that has hampered any investment in Albania, especially foreign investors are quite concerned because of the not clear cuts when it comes to property right. Corruption is an important factor, especially the nepotism, which has made many of the public institutions dysfunctional. And what that has created, it's quite difficult for someone to work in public institution or more broadly, which is one of those factors why the youth doesn't want to participate much in the public life. And the last sort of point is the lack of EU optimism. So in Albania, the EU optimism was quite high, but the EU accession process is dragging on for quite a long time. So at the time, or at least now, it seems that Albania is living the same amount of time as during communism. So we only open accession talks this summer, and they think maybe in 15 years they might open accession talks, but that has contributed in terms of people wanting to contribute to the society on state. Now, some of the main factors of why migration in 2022, which is kind of linked also to what we are talking about here for the UK. Well, there are three factors that have contributed to the recent rise of migration in 2022. So in 2019, about 32,000 Albanians were left without a home because of a massive earthquake, which hit nearly 15 municipalities, and that was the most devastating in 40 years. The COVID-19 pandemic pushed nearly 23% of the population into poverty. And more recently, in 2022, the inflation grew in Albania to 6.7% to 8%. But what this means in number? Well, the World Bank estimated that Albanians in 2021 spending nearly 41% of their wages in food. But because of the rise of inflation, now they spend anything between 55 to 60% of their income in food. What this has also meant in terms of other numbers, in 2021, it would cost an average Albanian to live, the cost of living, $5.5 per day. And now that is 6.85. But as I told you earlier, with £200 per month, you can sort of make the month that it's making it really difficult for someone to live. So you would say then, why the UK? Well, the UK in 2010 was home to nearly 48,000 Albanians. From what we heard with Peter during the parliamentary hearing, now it's nearly 140,000. So the Albanian migration, how it's linked, it's sort of through family connection. So if a family is based here, they usually would, bring the others, and it is that kind of link. Secondly, and this is not talked quite a bit, Albanian citizens are classified as third country nationals. And what this means is they can only travel to Schengen countries, and they can stay there for a maximum of 3 months. And then somehow they have to find either a work contract or so forth. And the majority of them is somehow irregular, even though, we get a lot of this why they don't go to some other EU countries. You can see why. Over the summer, since the UK has over 1 million free jobs, in Albania, organized crime networks did, in a number of occasions, advertise that in the UK there are over 1 million jobs free, and we can provide you with service to go to the UK and you can have access to these jobs. Furthermore, the cost to come to the UK with small boats was between £2,000 to £5,000. And if we compare with other routes, it used to cost £12,000 to £20,000. So this means that it was way cheaper to come to the UK when we compared with other years. Now, what sort of impact this has for Albania? Well, Albania nearly 43% of its population lives abroad at the moment, but maybe when they do the new census, we might find some further information. When it comes to the Albanian politics response, they view migration largely as a positive thing because the remittances are quite high. So what this means, at least in the last 10 years, so the money that migrants send back home can contribute between 11 to 15% of the overall GDP. And practically, it's funding the welfare system in Albania. In 2021 and in 2022, the money that migrants sent back to Albania actually increased more than any time in the last 12 years. So they kind of reached the pre-Euro crisis figures. And they sent back home 340 million in 2021. And in 2022, they sent 376 million. And guess where this money came mostly from? UK. So UK was number one, US, and then it was Germany. Before it used to be Greece and Italy, but now are these two countries. Another impact, which is kind of interesting, nearly every year between 4,000 to 5,000 Albanians have finished their undergraduate or master or some sort of degree abroad, and 92% of them do not want to return home to Albania, and they do manage to find jobs abroad. Now, some of you might say, well, what can be some sort of solution? And I think we can talk today about it. But what I think it requires right now, it's a new social contract between the society, economic players, and political parties. Far too long, Albanian politicians have sold sort of the social contract around EU accession. So we will join the EU and everything will become better. So you will lift off poverty and so forth. Now, EU hasn't arrived in the last 30 to 33 years. So we kind of need an adjustment what our social contract would mean. Furthermore, protection of fundamental rights and property rights and the establishment of the rule of law would be key to sort of providing this social contract. And on the last point, we need to make youth and ordinary Albanians to feel that they can participate both in politics and economy. And at the moment, it seems a little bit like closed shop. And many youngsters, especially those who are educated abroad, do not have that sort of access. And to finish it off and to conclude with it, it's human condition and economic opportunities are sort of at the key what is driving Albanians to leave. So I hand it over to Peter. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Andi. And now we are going to get a British perspective on the issue. Peter, thank you. The floor is yours.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. So I thought I would first take a look at the facts regarding the recent irregular migration of Albanians to the UK, which is, after all, why we're having this session here today. And the first thing that I'd like to look at is the asylum statistics. So in the first 9 months of 2022, 13,000 Albanians claimed asylum in the UK. And most of those, about 12,000, claimed asylum in the 6 months from April to September. So it's a big increase over the summer. Now that number is almost 3 times the number of Albanian individuals that claimed asylum in the whole of 2021. And this figure for 2022 is for 9 months only. And we expect that number to have increased perhaps by a few thousand. So it may be as high as 4 times more than the number that claimed asylum in 2021. Now, crucially, overall asylum applications, those are applications by people of any nationality, increased only about 10% 2021 to the first 9 months of 2022. So this does seem to be a particular Albanian phenomenon. It puts the UK in quite a unique position because the UK now unusually receives more Albanian asylum applicants than any other comparable EU country. 13,000 in the first 9 months of last year. France, by comparison, 5,000. Germany, 1,700. Greece, 1,000. 5th place, Italy, 900. Small boats are, of course, a part of this picture. 90% of the 13,000 arrived by a small boat. These are mostly young men, 56% men the age 18 to 29, 81% are men under the age 50. So Albania is by far now the most common country of nationality amongst small boat arrivals. It made up about a third of all small boat arrivals in the first 3 quarters of last year, and is far ahead of second place Afghans, about 5,000 arriving by a small boat. So what explains this increase? Why are Albanians coming to the UK? They not get the memo? It's a bit of a puzzle because there doesn't seem to have been a big shift in the conditions of life for people in Albania, the kinds of shift that would lead to big outward refugee and asylum flows. And unfortunately, there's very little we can say in response to this question on the basis of the hard statistical data. However, there are 2 relevant points on asylum. The first thing we can observe is that the asylum success rates for Albanian male applicants in recent times have been very low, about 10%. By contrast, for women, their success rate is about 90%. So the UK government is accepting Albanian female adult applicants as legitimate, but not the men. Now, one always has to adopt a certain amount of caution in viewing grant statistics. They're not a perfect indicator of whether people have valid claims or not. We know that because large shares of those Home Office decisions are overturned on appeal, higher than 50% at last count. But nevertheless, this low 10% success rate figure for the men suggests that amongst them, their motivation for coming to the UK may be something other than seeking protection, for example, economic or family reasons. The second data point is on withdrawals of asylum applications, because this includes those who have absconded from the asylum process. And we do see that Albanians withdraw their asylum applications at twice the rate of the average nationality, about 10% or so. Then there's this point that Andi raised on visa-free travel, because it's often the case that people only claim asylum in a country if they don't have immigration status and they come into contact with immigration enforcement. But for the UK, Albanians, they do need a visa to come here. That's not the case for EU countries. The small boat route means, of course, that people are generally detected before they arrive in the UK. And if they were not to claim asylum, then they would be liable for removal. So claiming asylum could be a way to prolong their stay in the UK. So what's the UK's response been to this phenomenon? There have been 4 main responses. The first, which was announced in August of last year, was a fast-track removal scheme and basing Albanian police at Dover. They announced plans, this is the Home Office, to remove Albanian nationals who had, quote, no right to be in the UK under a plan agreed with the Albanian government. They said this was to tackle the scourge, quote, of small boat crossings. And this left many lawyers, and me as well, wondering how this might work in practice, because most Albanians, as we've seen, claim asylum on arrival, and it's not possible to remove asylum seekers to their country of origin, where they may be at risk. So some lawyers asked the government, and the government responded by saying, actually, Albanians who applied for asylum would not be subject to return under this agreement. Now, given that 90% of Albanian boat arrivals claim asylum on arrival, it's not clear really how this returns policy would tackle small boat crossings. The plan also provided for Albanian police to be stationed at Dover, and it was recently revealed in a Home Affairs Committee inquiry that 2 Albanian officials had been based in Dover but not for very long, only for a few. Second response has been a UK-Albania joint communique titled Enhancing Bilateral Cooperation in Areas of Common Interest, signed in early December last year. This pledged that the two countries would work together to combat illegal immigration and trafficking. The agreement references a joint task force at the level of the Ministry of Albania's Interior and the Home Office. In the framework of this task force, quote, the UK government will strengthen UK-Albania cooperation at the operational level, including but not limited to effective data sharing and more joint operational teams. The UK will also provide additional support to the government of Albania with regards to protection and reintegration services to support people returned there. More details were not provided, but some were revealed in the Prime Minister's speech of 13th of December last year, in which he outlined 4 main policy developments regarding Albanians. First, the UK will embed border force officers in Tirana Airport. Second, the government will issue new guidance for our asylum caseworkers that make it clear that Albania is a safe country. Third, as a result of which the vast majority of claims from Albanians can simply be declared clearly unfounded. Lastly, the Prime Minister resolved to change how the UK government processes claims from Albanians with a new dedicated unit for Albanian entrants staffed by 400 specialists. The fourth response is a part of those, and it's this new country guidance for our asylum decision makers. And it's quite interesting because actually most of it contradicts Rishi Sunak's point that the guidance will make it, quote, crystal clear that Albania is a safe country. In fact, the updated guidance highlights the fact, emphasizes, and cites numerous organizations that argue that one of the risk factors of human trafficking includes the difficult economic situation in Albania, and that this is likely to feed into more human trafficking, which in Albania is seldom prosecuted. That was the main thrust of that guidance. Now, at the moment, more changes appear to be on the horizon. It appears that the government is going to introduce to Parliament a new bill on illegal immigration, and more proposals regarding Albanians in particular are expected. But for the time being, we don't know exactly what they will amount to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, excellent, and thank you. We had even more time. We've gained some time ahead of time, and now we move on to our next speaker. Fabian will give us a broader perspective on criminal networks.
So thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to come here and present on a sensitive topic, and I'll follow up from the Peter data, which we are all worried in Albania, where I'm coming, which is the highest number of immigrants, illegal or undocumented immigrants that are coming through the channel. 56% of them are between 18 to 29 years old. And we have a considerable number of children that are considered missing, 200 up to 300. We are not sure about the right figure, but there is a concern that some of them may be absorbed by organized crime. So there is a huge discussion in the media, but also behind the doors, that how much of this 13,000 number is recruited for criminal activities in the UK. We don't have a figure about that, but we know that a percentage of the youths which are exposed to bureaucratic procedures and they don't find the right channels of at least reporting and integration, they may easily resort to organized crime. There are two ways. In fact, there are those that are recruited directly in Albania by organized crime groups, and those that they come with an economic reason, but all of a sudden, organized crime groups are more quick in offering the service that probably public institutions fail to deliver. And it is this service that organized crime is providing so efficiently that makes them a good host and very risky for certain youth that are coming here, either for legitimate interest. There is a case, interesting case, in fact. There was a guy that he was studying for a master's degree in the UK. All of a sudden, he couldn't afford to pay the rent, and he were offered by criminals to host them in the house, provide him certain pocket money, and slowly, he was recruited by organized crime, and he was running his own cannabis farm. And this shows that even people that can come on visa and legitimate through legitimate instruments, they can easily fall to or resort to organized crime group, because the money there and access to this money and benefits is very low cost. So let me start with a concern that we have. We are doing the research as a global initiative about Albanian organized crime in the UK, and the relationship with one part of it is how this illegal migration is related. What is the nexus about it? And in my talk today, I will be focused on the in-house cannabis farm. Why this criminal market is developing and gradually seized and influenced by Albanians who are competing with the Vietnamese organized crime groups. Let me start that until 2014, Albania was the main, among the main source countries of cannabis growth. I mean, we were considered like the Colombia of Europe. I mean, referring to Daily Mail kind of titles. But there was some truth in it. We had a village in the south, an amazing village, on top of the mountains. People used during the King Zog. During probably even Lord Byron that visited us at that time. People used to go in this village for breathing some air. It is very nice and clean, but it happens to be a very good place to raise cannabis in a very high quality. And the cannabis that was produced there was like 50% of our GDP. And by 2016, I mean, the Italian police immediately asked that we should react and close it down, because this is becoming a problem for Italians. So by 2016, we managed to eradicate, and now we don't have the problem in Albania with the cannabis, outdoor cannabis growth. And many of the know-how that was developed there was exported overseas. And many of the Albanians that were dealing with the cannabis growth moved to Benelux countries. Slowly, some of them moved in Spain and in the UK. And in the UK, they got in contact with the Vietnamese organized crime groups. They learned how to rise in-house cannabis farms. And because of the business model that they developed, which is very loose, and it gives you space to create your own independent business model, this is the business that attracted youth. So in the cocaine criminal market, usually the structure of organized crime groups is very hierarchical. People know each other very well, and you have to spend some time with them in order to be credible. When in the cannabis farm, you start as a worker, and then you can end up as running your farm. And this is not the only end of it. It proves that in-house cannabis farms is also profitable. You can spend 30 to 40,000 pounds, and you can earn 70,000 pounds in 6 months. So the high return rate with you don't need to know very good English, you don't need to know and to have a master's degree in Oxford or Cambridge, but just to come there and know how to brush out the place. So this is how they developed. And what makes it very interesting, and I'll stop and I will develop the last part of it, what is the modus operandi? So we did the study and said, how comes that Albanians have been somehow influential in the cocaine market, which is huge in terms of high profit. How now we see that in-house cannabis farm is keep growing and increasing and is competing probably with the cocaine market. And we thought probably this is related to some in finance, the diversification of the portfolio by criminals and so forth. But in the end, our research shows that it is the business model that they've developed. There are three ways that this works. First, the first business model is by working relationship. So I hire you based on a so-called contract employment. So you work for my farm and you get paid £5,000 per month. And for someone with low education coming from Albania, from a small town in the south or north, that's a good money. And in 6 months you come back, you can go back. And if you're captured, what's the problem? Because you have at least £30,000 and you can purchase a house, this is what we call the British dream. The second form is the shareholder system. So after some time of working experience, those that work in the house, then they can claim to have their own business. And to keep them there, the owners or the kingpins will tell them, okay, let's work on shares. So you work, I have the know-how, you get a percentage, which can be 30 to 40%. And I mean, you grow and you cultivate, and then I can sell to the wholesale market. And the third option is what we call franchise system. So again, this is the third level. So after 2 years, you start as a worker, you do some career, you move to the shareholder, and then you become you work as a franchise, which means that I can produce and you can give me the access to the market. And of course, they cooperate with other organized crime groups and other youths, because you know that the line distribution, that's how cannabis is distributed then by train, by taxi. There is another scheme how it works and why they are successful also on that. And this is what makes this business very interesting for the youths. And the recruitment methods also is the second aspect that made this criminal market one of the markets that is absorbing most of the illegal migrants that are involved in criminal activity. This is what we call peer-to-peer recruitment. So I own the house, I'm 25 years old. I show to my friends, because what they do all the days, they stay inside and play video games and communicate to their youths back home. And we did some focus groups with some youths there, and we learned how this works. And they will tell them, look, guys, I'm playing video games, I'm having this money. It's great money, 70,000 for 6 months. Why don't you come here? Start slowly, you get a salary and you can have your own farm. And this peer-to-peer recruitment has made also the investigation of these criminal markets or main actors very difficult, because they are incriminating themselves and they will not give up, because if they give up in the law enforcement, then they are the source of the crime and recruitment. And this is what we believe has made this criminal market very dangerous, because it's affecting the social fabric and is giving very easy access to youth to the criminal market. Later on, some of them can also join at the upper echelon of criminal activity, which is the cocaine market, which is very dangerous. And I'll close it here to be on time.
Oh no, you have 4 more minutes. Sorry, this was a 5-minute warning.
Okay, so the last thing. So what we learn is that, first of all, the cannabis farms is an uncontrolled market. It is very independent in the sense that it is not hierarchical. It is not that organized. So in the cocaine market, if you tackle the leader, you can tackle the whole system. But in the cannabis farm, you can tackle one house or a farm, but you cannot necessarily find the whole chain because they work on a network base. So I have my farm. I know the distributors. They work for everyone like pizza system. So and that's why this is very easily to enter in. It targets youths, which you can easily brainwash them and recruit them, and also on the social aspect, we think that this is the criminal market that now is socially affecting more than cocaine market. So in heroin market, Albanians are not that affected because it's a Turkish and Pakistani that are more involved. So I'll end it here and then to leave some time for discussion.
Excellent, thank you. Another fascinating talk. I would like to thank our speakers, and now we can open the floor and take questions. And we will also check whether we have questions from our audiences online. Okay, so if I can ask you first to introduce yourself.
Stefan Schrader, Marie Curie Fellow at Columbia. Just two brief factual questions. First one, Albania, of course, has a sizable minority populations, and I wonder how is the distribution affected of migrants coming from Albania, whether minorities are more likely or less likely to migrate and seek asylum, and the places that they go to. And the second, I understand there hasn't been a census in a very long time in Albania, and I think postponed again. Could you clarify that? Is there sort of clarity on numbers of people actually in Albania, and can that be tracked successfully as to how many people actually come and go?
And I think that there was one more hand. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. I have a lot of questions. I'm Cindy, I'm a student at Albania. So I have questions for all of you, actually. I don't know where to start. And you could just interrupt me when I'm talking a lot. But for Andi, or this is actually a general question. When you're talking about migration, irregular migration, it's a very slippery concept. And I was wondering if you could just like give us a definition, just so I know where you're situated and like the position that you're talking about. Like, because you usually talk about asylum seekers and migrants, and then illegal migrants and irregular migration, like almost inseparably from each other. So I just wanted to know where to stand on that. For Andi, I was wondering when you mention like economic factors and all of these conditions, that make people come to migrate to the UK and other EU countries. I was wondering, what is the role of ethnicity in this, or like people who are actually facing prosecution back home, like people from marginalized groups like LGBTQ plus groups, people who are facing like gender-based violence or like discrimination of this kind, like Roma people from Roma ethnicities that are coming here and other that are migrating or seeking asylum in other countries of the European Union as well. So yeah, just in terms of statistics, because I think when we talk about this heteronormative dichotomies between like men who are coming and like women who are not coming, it just like makes the debates much more simplified than it actually is. It loses a lot of nuance. And when you're talking about like the earthquake and COVID as being two of kind of agents of impoverishment almost, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the role of the actual government, because it wasn't like just the phenomena of the earthquake or COVID-19 that led to these like poverty conditions being exacerbated in the country. They just visibilized underlying conditions that were already there and were faced by, insufficient responses from the government. And when you're talking about solutions, sorry, these are a lot of questions. Solutions for whom and by whom? Like, are these solutions that the Albanian government should implement? Because you said we should like make Albania more attractive to like students who are leaving, and it's just, what about the British side of it? And to Peter, then, when you use the word like tackle the problem of dingy boats, they're a very strong word in my opinion. But I was just wondering that what appears to be the problem that you're tackling? Is it the overflowing of people? Is it the types of people who are coming? Is it that organized crime that they're being, absorbed by? And so, yeah, and for Fabian, I just have one question. I really loved what you were saying, but can you talk a little bit more about methodology? Did you do like the focus groups of youth in Albania itself, or you're just wondering about this global initiative study? Yeah.
Thank you. Well, so we have a first round of questions, many very interesting questions. So we can start first with Andi.
Sure, thank you. Well, I think some of the question I can put them together. When it comes to minority, if that minority, the Greek minority or Bulgarian or so forth, all of them already gotten an EU passport, so it's hard to track whether how they have left or to what number. The majority, it is difficult to kind of pinpoint, and that kind of links with your second question, because we haven't had a census in the last 12 years. They suggested that they would do the census last year because it was indication that Albania would open accession talks. At the moment, it's frozen, but I suspect it will happen soon, because part of the screening process that the EU is doing, the census is one of the preconditions, so that I have a good idea. Now, the Albanian government has said that the Albanian government has said that they are a bit reluctant, or they're cutting out, because over the summer this year there were a number of cyber attacks happened, and that kind of had an impact in terms of how data was facilitated, protected. So the response is, once we sort of get that under control, we will carry on with the census, but it's still a bit developed. When it comes to
So can I just one quick follow-up? The Greeks and Bulgarians, they have the passports because they lived and worked for a period of time in their respective countries.
No,
The two countries hand them out to people living in Albania.
they hand them out, because in these countries you can, if you kind of can prove that you're ethnically from there. So the majority, at least I know from South where I come from, where they say in Greece, all of them got their passport because Greece made that facilitation. When it comes to some of your question, I understand that some are, don't want to look sort of at the COVID and the rise of inflation, as well as the earthquake. But we like it or not, yes, there were poor conditions before, but these have actually made it more difficult for the population in Albania. And the figures do not lie, because it has made it far more difficult for someone to live. In terms of the respondent, this also links a little bit with the solution. I think we have to sort of get away from the whole thing that always the government has to solve every single problem. Political parties across, including the government, can take some proposals in terms of the solution that they can provide. For example, local governments in Albania, they do not participate much on the local issues. And some of these issues are local, and we do not see them participating as much. But of course, the major burden is to the government, and they have to come up with some sort of solution. When it comes, you also mentioned a little bit about the UK role into this. As far as we know from the agreement and for the research that I'm doing, the UK has given the green light to spend £7.5 million in the area of Bucos, where the majority of Albanians, it's believed to have come to the UK, and that is particularly to improve the socioeconomical conditions, especially on education. But I'll leave it to my colleague so we can get around the questions.
Lovely. Thank you very much for those questions. I suppose I could pick up one of the questions, which may have been for you, but the definition of a regular entry. So I presume you're using it in exactly the same way I do, which is to enter the UK without authorization. So in the language of the Home Office, that would be without a valid entry clearance. In other words, for this group, without a valid visa. That's what we mean by regular entry. What's interesting, though, is that as soon as these individuals claim asylum, they're no longer irregular migrants, because once they claim asylum, they are legally resident in the UK up until the point at which their claim is refused and all rights of appeal exhausted. Now, the other question, tackling the problem. So I should be clear that this is not a problem that I'm tackling. I'm not even sure that I would describe it personally as a problem, but the government does. And I think they do so for two reasons, which may be to varying degrees disingenuous, and I'll explain why. The first is that they view these entries as dangerous, arriving by a small boat. Fair enough. And the second is because it's an irregular entry that violates our immigration law. But to some extent, the government really is implicated in the cause of this issue, a more neutral word, because there is no safe and legal route to come to the UK for the specific purpose of claiming asylum. But you do have to be in the UK to claim asylum. It's not possible to claim asylum from abroad, say at a British embassy or consulate. You have to be on UK soil, but there's no visa to allow you to do so, which of course compels people to take these dangerous and irregular routes. So there's another thing as well, which is that the government, at least on the surface, they say that they're worried about the asylum system being abused. In other words, that these are individuals who are not coming to the UK with the genuine intent and desire to claim asylum, that they're not really fleeing like serious threats to their life or liberty in the country they've come from. My point on this is that really it's not for the government to second guess that and to create a blanket policy, because you never really know what people's circumstances are until you assess the specific facts of their case. And there are loads of examples. I mean, Edward Snowden might be one. You might say, oh, the US is a safe and prosperous country. Yet in the case of Snowden, some people would argue that actually he had a legitimate basis for his asylum claim. And actually people are granted asylum from countries that in the UK government's view would be at the top of the list of safe countries. So, yeah, thank you.
So in terms of the question on methodology, we have used is the qualitative. We've conducted expert interviews, both in the UK and Albania, with the law enforcement agents, academics, investigative journalists, and also we conducted 2 focus groups to hear the opinion of youths, how they see and how they are affected. What is the subculture developed now? Because there's a subculture developed among the youth, and I'm not talking now the methods and instruments that are used, how the life in the UK is glamorized, you know, Albanians and stuff like that, but how this is translated in the narrative among the youth, and how this is also somehow instrumentalized. And I'm not talking also this regional north model of the north, the Highlanders and the south. These are some of other aspects that are misused and hijacked by certain organized crime groups that are targeting the youth. But I wanted to add something also on the push factors. I think one of the reasons is that we need to, I mean, I'm someone that finished the degrees in the UK, and I am the victim of a very harsh policy by Theresa May in 2013. I finished my PhD and I wanted to teach for some time to get some experience. And all of a sudden, because I started my PhD knowing that I will have the right to work for 2 years and to develop more my knowledge. But all of a sudden I was caught out and I had some job interviews shortlisted, but I had to leave immediately. And I think this inconsistency of the visa regime and a lot of instructions that are provided that are very complex is one of the reasons. When it comes to the seasonal visa that is applied in the UK, there is only one agricultural visa that you can come for 6 months. But when you see the conditions, it's like, don't even try. So this probably we should add to the push factors that people will find it easier to go through these routes, £4,000, get on the boat, 10 hours in the sea, and risk your life and go and achieve your British dream. And I think, but I'm not here to present what are my thoughts about the current policy, because what I see at the moment is only the stick policy and we don't see the carrot. Even though the agreement that they achieved, there is only one paragraph there in the end about investing in education and IT skills, which in fact probably will send back people there. But this is another thing, and I was not here to present, and we have discussed with Dr. Hoxhaj, and we have given our thoughts to other forums, what are our views on that. And I hope I satisfied your answer, question, sorry.
Excellent. And then we have 3 more questions. So David.
Thank you very much. Thank you for 3 excellent presentations. Very interesting. 2 questions, one sort of for all of you, in fact, which is, you've all given examples of inconsistencies in the UK visa policies. When you discuss this with DG Home Office officials, do they admit that there are inconsistencies, or do they try and say, well, the policy is developing and do they admit that there are genuine difficulties in that? And the second question was specifically about cannabis, not because I'm thinking of growing it, but
this is a very interesting place.
Yeah, but the thing is, does the UK actually produce a lot more cannabis than other European countries, say? And if so, why? Is it the climate? Is it why?
Okay, so we just take 2 more questions and then we'll have a chance to and then have Barbara.
Yeah, Barbara, I'm doing the effort in European politics here. And I was just wondering, sort of, perhaps the question was to Peter, what happens after Albanians arrive and get picked up by the Coast Guard, border guards, make claim for asylum? How long does it take? And in which conditions do they live? And once they actually their cases do get decided and they might have gone through appeal, do they actually get sent home? What happens in the meantime? Do they integrate? Do they not? Are they kept in separate centers? And also, perhaps what and how much? I mean, returns are always also difficult because you have to cooperate with the country where people are coming from, right? But perhaps also a bit interest in how far is Albania and how is the cooperation between Albania and the UK working on the returns right now? Because you kind of mentioned that Albania also with the remittances, that it's not economically speaking too bad for their country, right? And yeah, and the final part perhaps also when people get rejected and they have been there for 2 years, or perhaps they get sent out after making money in cannabis trade, do many return? This is like a thing that people go for 2 years, come back home, a year later they'll try again. You're kind of faced with the same individuals that always go through the same process. And Max?
Hi, I'm Max. I'm also doing a second year MPhil in European politics as well. And I also have 2 questions to Peter, I think mostly on the numerical side of things. First of all, if we talk about the salience of the issue at the moment, and we use numbers like the 13,000, I believe you said, we use reference numbers that point towards 2020 and 2021, whilst COVID was mostly all over Europe. Should we use reference numbers from before COVID? Because in general, migration numbers during these years. And the second part is, to what extent is it useful to use EU countries that have a visa liberalization agreement with Albania as a reference point as well, such as Italy, France, and the Netherlands? Because even if the visa liberalization agreements don't necessarily pertain to working agreements, people still work under them, sometimes illegally. And that also points towards another fact that, for example, for Albanian citizens, it's much easier to go towards the border of France and UK and Calais than for Afghan citizens, because they're legally allowed to enter France and all the countries towards there. So doesn't make sense to even reference them, or is it just giving their savings towards an issue that the government talked about?
Oh, we have a number of very interesting questions, and we can start with Fabian.
So why cannabis growth is increased in the UK? I cannot say whether there is an increase. What we know is that Albanian organized crime groups, or Albanians have been involved and see some of the markets. and I get the factors because we have kind of a know-how on that, which we learned in Benelux. Albanians were known for outdoor cannabis growth, but indoor they learned in Benelux and by the Dutch and Moroccan organized crime groups. When they came here, they tested, they started, because this is how it works for the Vietnamese, and using some networks and powerful muscles by cocaine organized crime groups, they slowly got in the market, and now they are developing. What was the other question? A consistency. I think this is a real serious issue. I mean, we have raised, and Dr. Hoxhaj, we were at a hearing at the parliament yesterday, and we raised that. I mean, Dr. Hoxhaj will talk about that, but from my perspective, I think this is related to the one of the pillar of the due process and constitutional rights, which is the status of the law should be consistent and persistent. Because when people apply for education or for perspective, they think that the law will be consistent. And as I said in my case, this is a problem that it is happening in the UK, and I think it is affected because now what we see is that the lower skilled people are attracted by the UK, where Germany, that is applying a different system, which is very harmful for our society, because most of our engineers, doctors, academics are absorbed by Germany. Only Greek government 2 days ago announced that they are seeking 60 to 70,000 people to work in the tourism sector. So, and this now, and I don't see where is the policy of the UK. Every country in Europe is looking to hire people because there is a job shortage, and they are changing whole the structure and the strategies of recruitment. When in the UK, we see that this is, I don't know, the policy is a bit here and there.
Thank you, Peter.
So thank you very much for those questions. So what happens to Albanians as they arrive? So they are first of all apprehended, typically in British waters, the vast majority. There are some that are apprehended previously by the Navy. Now it's going back to the Home Office. Before the Navy, it was the Home Office, Border Force. In French waters, but the vast majority in British waters before they reach the UK coastline. They are processed initially within 2 days, typically held in what's called short-term holding facilities, either at the port in Dover or sometimes, increasingly, in detention centres. This 2-day period is to collect essential information, where they're from, age, etc. And most claim asylum. And at that point, within the 2 days of collecting the initial information, they would traditionally, as for all asylum seekers, be transferred to what's called dispersal accommodation. This is private rental accommodation dispersed across the country, typically low-cost housing, highly concentrated in poorer areas. And there's a reason for that, which is that it's organised by third-party contractors, and they have a strong incentive to source accommodation. But more recently, that accommodation, the government says it's run out. I think that the likely is that there's been some mismanagement. So the government has found it hard to source private rental accommodation, so they've been using hotels. So typically now, most arrivals are transferred to hotels, which is quite problematic for their integration. It's very isolating to live in a hotel. You know, at first I thought, oh great, hotel room, oh, I'm listening to watch TV, but it's actually really tough. They find it quite difficult to form the kinds of social connections that are very important to human well-being and flourishing. And right now, waiting times are very long. For Albanians, they're amongst the worst. The average time to receive a decision, an initial Home Office decision on their asylum claim is about 2 years. 35% are waiting longer than 3 years for that initial decision. And this has quite catastrophic effects for their integration. For several reasons, but chief among them perhaps is that they're not permitted to work while they're awaiting an initial decision on their claim. You know, to some extent, it's no wonder that they go work irregularly because they're not permitted to work legally. Of course, quite a number of those individuals are those who will go on to be successful in their claim. And a majority, at the last count, of Albanians would go on to be successful in their claim, especially if they're women applicants or children. And so critics have pointed out that it doesn't really make much sense to hamstring individuals' integration in this way. I mean, these are going to be, whether the government likes it or not, permanent citizens, probably residents in the UK, and many will go on to be citizens. You don't allow them to work for 3 years. Support's very limited, £5.80 per day. Accommodations included, but £5.80 per day. So these things aren't very good for integration. Returns, they're very low. And so I figure for all nationalities, recent period is that those who had their claim refused and exhausted appeal rights in 2019, I think it's something like 90% had not left the country by the summer of last year. So it's given, you know, enough 2.5 years, something like that, for them to be removed. It's very difficult to remove people because you need returns agreements with other countries, and the UK doesn't have any, except with Rwanda. But Rwanda's for applicants rather than people who've been refused. So the Home Office has become very bad at returning people. And Albanians, if memory serves, it's equally bad at returning Albanians as it is other nationalities. This may change because a returns agreement was signed with Albania in 2021. And I think there were reports, 1,000, the government had claimed 1,000 people have been returned to Albania.
And this is the highest rate compared to others.
Yes, yes. But those were foreign national offenders, so they've been returned on the basis of criminal convictions rather than simply asylum refusals. So that's the returns issue. Is there any aspect that I missed there in the picture? So they're going to be languishing in accommodation, probably hotels for the time being, for some time on present evidence. Turning to your questions, thank you very much indeed. So for virtually every aspect of the immigration system, you would be well advised, and actually I think probably even now, just to avoid the suspicion of fudging, I should have compared it with pre-COVID figures. But actually in the asylum system, numbers had rebounded by 2021 and were actually higher in 2021 than they were in 2019 or any year in that decade. But nevertheless, yeah, I think it probably would have been sensible. Your second point, so there's a lot of points there. Rather than go through each of them individually, I'll just say that there wasn't a single point that I disagreed with. And whenever I would present an analysis of that, usually it would be accompanied by exactly those caveats. Because really, for the reasons that you gave, these are vastly different systems and contexts. They're not directly comparable. I presented them today because often people are interested in them. They want to get some kind of sense, even if I'm not always able to provide the necessary caveats, but you made excellent points, so I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Andy.
Well, to your point, Ambassador, in terms of inconsistency, if we take a little bit a step back, before the Foreign Office used to be able to issue visas, but because there was an internal agreement to hand over the visa process to the Home Office, the Home Office started to take a slightly different approach, which is more around the securitization theory. And when it comes to Albanian, why there's this inconsistency is because the National Crime Agency has considered Albanian organized crime for a very long time a national security threat. Until then, there was sort of a public discussion between the two governments that was wrong. But what that had as an impact is that Albanian when they were viewed or when their visa were processes, the initial idea was to reject them first. And in a way, it was, well, you are guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah.
And that has also spilled over to what we are currently talking about. So if we have a look at the agreement, although the British government don't want to call it agreement nowadays, only a communicate. If you have a look, the majority is based on security concern, and it's very much securitized. And then when you look at the economic, and then the very last point on education, it seems like they struggle through, and then let's add this one more point. So that's why we have that inconsistency. And at the moment, there's a discussion between the FCDO and the Home Office if they could come to some sort of agreement in terms of going back to jointly issue visa. But that's sort of an internal British government decision, and that would not only be for Albanians, but overall. But that's why is the sort of inconsistency. When it comes to the point on cannabis, if I may add a little bit. Well, the cannabis industry in the UK has increased more over time in terms of its profit, but also being normalized and used far more widely in the UK. And when it comes to organized crime, those who are engaged on the drug market, they would rather prefer to be working on cannabis than cocaine, because, you know, if you get caught with cannabis, you serve far more less time than cocaine. So for them, it might be worth, you know, even if we get caught, we might do a little bit of time. And probably there are some backgrounds into it, and that's some of the studies that look at the drug market in the UK. Now, in terms of your question, where you asked whether there is an integration process when they are returned back to Albania, there was a question about that. No, there is not a program aware of either offenders or either this migrant when they go back to Albania, what happened to them. And yesterday, part of the hearing in Parliament that I was invited to speak about, that was one of my main points, that there should be a reintegration program that both the UK, but in particular the Albanian government, should put into place, because what would happen is when you return them, what do you do with them, right? And then they could feed into this whole vicious cycle. But more importantly, when it comes to offenders, especially from organized crime groups, having a reintegration program is very important, because some of them might actually get acquainted here or make network with some, you know, other organized crime groups from across the globe, and then use those links when they go out, right? So making them a productive member of the society when they go back would be key, because otherwise then what we do, we just have these vicious cycles, which, you know, we currently heading at. And I think that's going to be the next discussion. But the problem is here that the UK is viewing this as a security problem. And it's very much around the securitization approach rather than, you know, a more legal or socio-economical approach in terms of. And then on your last point, you said, well, it was 13,000 this year, and when we compare it before. The year before, it was only 220 that crossed in small boats. But this is because small boats were not widely advertised, especially when it comes to Albania, and this year was far more advertised. Furthermore, it was far more cheaper with other routes. However, when we compare it overall, it's hard to say whether this year more Albanian came than the previous year, because the statistics and from an analysis that you can make, in 2010, there were 48,000 Albanians in the UK. And now, especially in the hearing that we went, there are 140,000. So if we kind of divide it over the last 12 years, you might have 8 to 10,000 coming every year, right? But because it was small boat, everybody could see it and they get caught. Probably this. Then the comparison when you say with other EU countries, I mean, that's an approach that the British government has taken to make a comparison. And what they are asking is, why are they coming here and why they're not going to other places where, you know, they might work or make it more accessible. But again, coming to my point, Albanians are considered as third country national, meaning that they can only stay in one of the EU countries for 3 months And thereafter, if they do not find a job, some of them were sort of irregular, right? However, Germany is taking a slightly different approach, and that's more to integrate the Western Balkans. And here again, some of you asked why the UK is doing this. Well, the elephant in the room is Brexit, right? Brexit was all about taking control, stopping illegal migration, or migration overall. And even though, some of the statistics, or at least economic calculation, are there 43,000 this year that came, irregular migrant? It will cost them millions and millions of pounds. It would cost far more less if they give them some sort of paperwork and put them into the formal economy. But it's a political decision which the UK government is taking.
Excellent, thank you. And now I think we have one question online and two.
Can I just quickly respond to the ambassador's first question, just to give a direct answer, which was on, do Home Office officials admit inconsistencies with respect to immigration policy in this area? Not publicly. And they'll typically say things like, oh, well, it's a fast moving policy area, contexts are different, it's complicated, we need to be nimble. That's typically what they will say. Another way of describing their behavior is that actually they're reactive. Yeah. And that's why we don't see a long-term coherent policy. They just respond to whatever fire, in their view, has emerged. So I think sorry about that.
No worries, that's fine. So we have a few questions online. Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, perfect. Thank you.
The first one is, how many cannabis cocaine factories are there in the UK, and how big are they? What success rate are UK police having closing them down? And would those running them be sent to prison in the UK or deported? That's Andaton, anonymous attendee. That's the second question. Thank you for the 3 presentations. It is still unclear what are the issues and proven consequences of this increasing Albanian migration towards the UK? Question mark. Is British society suffering from this influx? If yes, how? Nicholas Paris asks, how much economics and other support does Turkey provide?
Turkey.
Sorry, is it
Turkey.
Turkey?
To Albania, presumably.
Shall we answer this, or do you want to take more?
I think we have 5 hands. I think that we have.
I think that's generally.
Yes. No, sorry. We had before Ivan. There is another hand.
I was just going to add more of a suggestion to Peter's question. Is those Albanians that are coming into the UK, is any suggestion it would be easier to give work permits, so therefore they're not trapped to the organised crime until their case is decided? They can contribute to British society, learn the British value, integrate, not claim benefits, for instance, that most people are scared of saying, I'm a taxpayer, is there a suggestion that the government are looking into this? They're just waiting in a room for 3 years, waiting, and then therefore is the little boys telling you maybe I should go to the organised crime?
Right, there's absolutely no indication whatsoever that the government.
So then if they tax, you contribute to society, and then it's part of the integration, and then until your case is decided, and then therefore.
Well, I mean, if the only problem with that argument is that, yeah, it makes sense. It's what seems like quite a reasonable approach. There's no indication considering that, and I would suggest that they wouldn't.
I mean, it's not just for the Albanians, any migrants there.
Yeah, so unusually, there's a few countries that have, for example, used amnesties for irregular migrants, or that allow asylum seekers to run while they're awaiting status on their claim. The UK government's position on the first policy is that, without evidence, by the way, it would lead to increased irregular migration in the future. And with regard to the second, that it would lead to increased asylum flows, it would act as a pull factor, allowing people to work. Again, I don't know of any evidence to support that, but clearly the government has made it obvious that they're not going to entertain liberal policies of that nature. They've really adopted a quite restrictionist, hostile environment style.
And is it 5-star hotel?
Yeah, so if we could just take, I think that there are 3 more hands to collect all the questions and then we can answer. We have Jonathan and then we have to, sort of 3 at the back. Yes, so Jonathan.
Okay, really, it was on the business model presentation by Fabian. If I've understood correctly, essentially you graduate through the 3 business models. And at what point do you have to start putting some of the money you have earned into the enterprise? Is that only in the 3rd stage when you move on franchise, or earlier already when you're in partnership?
Okay, and we have the last 3 questions at the back. So we have Ivan and then we have the 2 ladies in front.
Hi, my name is Scott and I am visiting from Switzerland and talking to you about the asylum system here and the pull factors in Britain. I immediately thought of the situation with us, and the interesting thing is that I'm not really sure, or at least I'm not aware of it, that the migration by Albanians has spiked in Switzerland. I'm wondering why, because it seems there are a lot of similarities, and I just looked it up before. We have actually 300,000 people that are already speaking the Albanian language, probably a lot of them not only coming from Albania, but more of Kosovo. So there's very substantial number of people already there in Switzerland. I'm wondering, have you also looked at this context? Because we're also not in the European Union, also very strict. At least it seems the asylum system is very similar. I'm not really sure about the agreements with specifically with Albania. Economic prosperity is actually better than here. We have unemployment rate of about 2 or 3%. So I'm really wondering, why does this not translate the same in this context?
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And we have the last 2 questions.
Okay, thank you. I'm Maria Teresa Fulcay, and I'm a student at Leiden University. I have a question about maybe towards Andi and Peter, but I think you could also give a different perspective. How much the political discourse in the media coverage of Albanian migrants has influenced the public perception, therefore perhaps pushing the political UK politics to bring about a product like the recent agreement between the UK and Albania. Because I think the media coverage, and this is also related to the last part of your previous response, that these numbers have not only been so high in 2022, they've been high long before that. But if perhaps media also playing a key role in this, in criminalizing this and not seeing them as much through a more humanizing lens.
Thank you. And okay, so we have this last round of questions. Maybe we can be a few minutes late. So if we can run 5 minutes late. So you can just take 2 minutes to address briefly. We have the last round of questions. So Fabian, would you like to?
So for the first question on how many cannabis farms are in the UK, I think is the question there. I don't have the figure, but what I have here is that the cannabis retail market in the UK is about £2 billion, which is a really large market compared to the EU retail market, and this makes it the high rate consumption makes it very attractive to produce the cannabis. On the business model, when do they start to invest the money in a franchise system? I think not necessarily, they don't need necessarily to follow the 3-step. So some of them, for instance, as I said, there are options from the cocaine organized groups that are diversifying the portfolio. So they are investing also in cannabis, and they can immediately move from the 2nd step, which is the shareholder, and they go to the franchise system. And but usually, if you start from the beginning, this is when in the third step you have accrued some money and profit, and then you invest for your own. And then from franchise system, then you can become one of the key players. And probably contribute to the last question on how does the media play a role. I think, of course, the media plays a role and has especially in the UK, it serves to this issue of illegal migration. But on the other hand, we should also emphasize this the social media in recruiting and affecting the Albanian youth. So how, because this is a question, how quickly and how effective was the TikTok in recruiting thousands of Albanians and believing in something that was completely new to us? I mean, it is a market that was run by Iraqi organized crime groups. And in a month time, it started with, I don't know, 500s. In a month time, we had Albanians going and staying in Dunkirk, in the suburbs, and the whole city, most of the, I mean, many people, they're even the taxi drivers. Immediately, the market, the criminal market developed. And this is another thing that as an Albanian researcher, I'm concerned with, that how through TikTok, criminals and organized crime can be so efficient, and how that plays a role in the youth nowadays, how easily they are exposed and how easily they can be a victim of this. So I will leave it to Peter and Andi to speak about the impact of British media in the British politics.
So I go first. Just responding to 4 of those questions. Is the UK suffering particularly from this influx? Well, I think I wouldn't even describe it as an influx. I'm not even sure it's big enough. 13,000. We had immigration of 1 million at the year ending June last year. So I think the aggregate effects of 13,000 can reasonably be expected to be minimal, not even a rounding error, I would suggest. The Switzerland question is a great question. I don't know the answer, but I will go away and look into that for you. That's a fantastic point. The support provided by Turkey, I don't know. I'm afraid I only know that the UK's support is not particularly attractive when compared with comparable countries like Germany, France, Spain, and Italy. Question about the media. I mean, this brings us back to tractable question in media studies. Does it drive or merely reflect public opinion? I don't know. But one thing that I can say, based on my PhD research, is that I think these newspapers do affect politicians. When I did my PhD research, I looked at the Theresa May administration, and an insider did observe that every day, a stack of newspapers on Theresa May's desk, the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the Sun, very much a sense. Yeah, so certainly I think they can have quite substantial.
Thank you. Okay, so on the Turkey question, maybe often you can organize another conference on that. But what I can say is that the trade between UK and Albania is overall £28 million. So Albania exports to the UK 4 million, and UK export to Albania 24, and Turkey on average has been 400 million. In terms of the influx of this year, and to kind of link it that a little bit with the media, well, Albanian as national made nearly 43% at what time, the majority of coming, and the impact that had is because Albania, it's a NATO member, and the UK has some sort of diplomatic relation with Albania. And when you compare it with other countries, Afghanistan or Syria, they are not really engaged, because they will not engage with the Taliban at the moment because it's not politically, approachable. So with Albania, it was slightly different why that was. In terms of the media and the role that the media played, well, the majority since being Albanian, it kind of had some impact into that. politicians because they are charging for the upcoming elections, and migration seems to be the main topic that's going to come. And since a number of them, especially in areas where they are in marginal seats, it was a good selling point to say that we are spending £7 million a day to accommodate Albania, although the figure can sort of be disputed. In terms of your question, why UK and not Switzerland? Well, we have to understand how Albanian migration operates and works. Usually it's through family links. And those who have arrived here, the majority of them have family ties in the UK, and they're sort of pooling them. So meaning when they arrive to the UK, most likely they will find an accommodation and most likely a job. And if you look at the demographic where the arrival coming from, the majority of them are in areas where here they are based. Whereas in Switzerland, as far as I know, there are ethnic Albanians from Kosovo. So similarly also in Kosovo, they would go to Switzerland, similarly also in Germany. So this is sort of how it operates because it helps with their integration. So that's why the UK is. However, for those who are highly skilled, probably Switzerland or the Nordic country are far more favorable than the UK. So that is kind of, yeah. So if I missed any question.
The one on here. The second one.
On the
consequences.
But I think if we've covered it, yeah, I think it. Yes.
Or how British society is impacting quite well. It's hard really to make a point how the British society is impacted. I mean, it's hard to tell. It's still unfound.
The impacts seem to be more secondary effects, stirred up by the media and the politicians, this kind of hysteria, but rather than the direct effect of the individuals. And it's only 13,000, it's nothing in the grand scheme of things.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I think that we have covered quite a lot of ground. We've had an excellent discussion, very insightful presentations from our excellent speakers, and I would like to invite you to join me in round of applause. Thank you again for sharing your